Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we make great English literature into gripping radio. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and tonight we're presenting the first of 5 parts in our adaptation of The Priory School, a classic Sherlock Holmes mystery that begins with the sudden arrival of a prestigious and exhausted client at Holmes's rooms in Baker Street. We have had some dramatic entrances and exits at Baker Street, but I cannot recollect anything more sudden and startling than the first appearance of Thornycroft Huxtable, M.A., Ph.D., etc. His card, which seemed too small to carry the weight of his academic distinctions, was delivered a few seconds before he entered himself. Before the door had even closed behind him, the man collapsed unconscious on our bearskin rug, leaving my friend and I staring in silent amazement. Then we rushed to his side and did what we could to tend him. His face was lined with stress, and he had dark circles under his eyes. His clothes were stained and worn, and his hair was dirty.
What's wrong with him?
Absolute exhaustion. Hunger and fatigue as well.
He's dropped his return ticket from Mackleton in the north of England. It is not yet noon. He must have left very early this morning.
The man's eyelids began to quiver, then jerked open, and he leapt to his feet with shame in his eyes.
Forgive my weakness. I have been a little overwhelmed. If I have a glass of milk and a biscuit, I'm sure I'll feel better. I came personally, Mr. Holmes, because I feared a telegram wouldn't convince you of the absolute urgency. I need you to come to Mackleton with me by the next train.
My friend shook his head.
I'm afraid we are very busy. I'm currently engaged on 3 separate cases. Only a very important issue could force me to leave London.
Important? Have you heard nothing of the abduction of the only son of the Duke of Holderness?
What? The former cabinet minister?
I tried to keep it out of the papers, but there was an article in the Globe last night. I thought you might have heard.
Holmes shut out his long, thin arm and picked out volume H in his encyclopedia of references.
Holderness, 6th the Duke, K.G., P.C., half the alphabet. Heir and only child, Lord Saltire, owns about 250,000 acres. Minerals in Lancashire and Wales. Address, Holderness Hall, Hallamshire. Well, this man is certainly one of the greatest citizens of the Queen.
And perhaps the wealthiest. I've heard, Mr. Holmes, that His Grace has promised to hand over a cheque for £5,000 to whoever can tell him where his son is, and another 1,000 to any who can name the man or men who have taken him.
Holmes leaned forward in his seat and thought for a moment.
That is a very great deal of money. Watson, I think that we shall accompany Dr. Huxtable back to the north. After all, Dr. Huxtable, once you have had your milk, please tell me what has happened, when it happened, how it happened, and finally, what Dr. Thornycroft Huxtable of the Priory School has to do with it all, and why he comes to me 3 full days after the event. The state of your stubble gives me the date to ask for my humble services.
Our visitor consumed his milk and biscuits, and slowly the light came back into his eyes and the color to his cheeks as he began to explain the situation. Huxtable informed us that he was the founder and principal of the Priory School in northern England. The Priory was among the best and most selective preparatory schools in the country, and counted many sons of the highest nobility among its students. But Huxtable only felt his school had reached its zenith when, several weeks before, the Duke of Holderness had sent Mr. James Wilder, his personal secretary, to inform him that the Duke's heir and only son, the 10-year-old Lord Saltire, would be joining his school. The boy arrived in time for the beginning of the summer term. He was charming, and soon settled into school life, but Huxtable knew the boy had not been entirely happy at home. It was an open secret that the Duke's marriage was troubled, and that things had become so bad he'd separated from his wife. The Duchess was now living at an estate in the south of France. The split had only happened a few weeks before Lord Saltire joined the Priory School, and the young boy was known to side strongly with his mother. He had been depressed after her departure from Holderness Hall, and it was for that reason that he'd been sent to the nearby Priory School. The boy was last seen 4 nights earlier. His room was on the second floor of the school and was only accessible through another room where 2 boys were sleeping. Those boys saw and heard nothing, so it seemed certain that young Saltier did not pass through there. His bedroom window was open, and there was a strong ivy plant growing past it from the ground. The police found no footprints outside, but it seemed certain the boy had climbed down the ivy from his window. His absence was discovered the next morning. His bed had been slept in. He had dressed himself fully in his school uniform. There were no signs that anyone had entered the room, and it is quite certain that if a struggle had occurred, it would have been heard. When Huxtable discovered the disappearance of Saltier, he called an assembly. It was there he found that Mr. Heidegger, the German teacher, was also missing. His room was also on the second floor, facing the same direction as the missing boys. His bed had been slept in as well, but he had apparently left only partly dressed, since his shirt and socks were found on the floor. He had undoubtedly climbed down the ivy, because investigators found the marks where he had landed on the lawn. He kept his bicycle in a small shed beside the lawn, and it was also gone. Heidegger had been hired with the best references, but he was a silent, grumpy man, unpopular with both the boys and the other teachers. No trace could be found of either fugitive, and the police were still as ignorant as they'd been on the first day. They had made inquiries at Holderness Hall, which is only a few miles from the school, thinking at first that the boy had tried to run home after becoming homesick. But nothing had been heard of him at Holderness, and the Duke was soon extremely worried. Here, Dr. Huxtable came to the end of his story and spoke beseechingly.
Mr. Holmes, I beg you to help.
Holmes had listened with absolutely focused attention to the man's story, and sat with a furrowed brow as he thought it over.
You should have come to me sooner.
I'm not to blame for the delay. The Duke wished to avoid public scandal. He didn't want to see his unhappy marriage dragged out in front of the press.
But the police must have done some work.
Yes, and it has been disappointing. A boy and a young man were seen leaving a nearby station for Liverpool, but they proved to be completely unrelated to the disappearance. 2 days were wasted investigating this red herring.
I suppose the local investigation slowed down while this false clue was being followed up?
It was entirely dropped.
Deplorable. 3 days have been wasted.
Yes.
I would be happy to look into it. Have you been able to trace any connection between the missing boy and this German teacher?
None.
Was he in the teacher's class?
No, he had never spoken with him, as far as I know.
That is certainly very odd. Did the boy have a bicycle?
No.
Was any other bicycle missing?
No.
Is that certain?
Quite.
Well now, you do not mean to seriously suggest that this German rode off upon a bicycle in the dead of the night carrying the boy in his arms?
Certainly not.
Then what is your theory?
The bicycle may have been a decoy. It may be hidden somewhere with the man and boy leaving on foot.
Quite so, but that seems rather an absurd decoy, does it not? Were there other bicycles in the shed?
Several.
Would he not hide 2 bicycles if he wanted to give the impression that they had left on them?
I suppose he would.
Of course he would. The decoy theory doesn't hold up. But the bicycle is a good starting point for our investigation. After all, it's not an easy thing to conceal or to destroy. One other question. Did anyone stop by to see the boy the day before he disappeared?
No.
Did he get any letters?
Yes, one.
From whom?
His father.
Do you open the boy's letters?
No.
Then how do you know it was from his father?
The coat of arms was on the envelope, and was addressed in the Duke's handwriting. Besides, the Duke remembers sending it.
Has he ever received one from his mother in France?
No, never.
You see the point of my questions. Either the boy was forced to leave or went by choice. Some outside prompting would be needed to make him go willingly. If he had no visitors, that prompting must have come in letters.
His only correspondent, as far as I know, was his father.
Were the relations between father and son friendly?
His Grace is never friendly with anyone. He is completely inaccessible to all ordinary emotions, but he has always been kind to the boy in his own way.
But the boy's sympathies are with his mother?
Yes.
Did he say so?
No.
Then how do you know?
I've had some confidential talks with Mr. James Wilder, His Grace's secretary. It was he who gave me the information about Lord Saltier's feelings.
I see. By the way, that last letter of the Duke's, was it found in the boy's room after he was gone?
No, he had taken it with him. I think, Mr. Holmes, it is time that we were leaving for Euston.
I will order a cab to bring us to the station. If you are telegraphing home, Mr. Huxtable, it would be wise to allow people in your neighborhood to think the investigation is still focused on Liverpool. Let us hope that the scent is still warm enough that two old hounds like Watson and I will be able to get a sniff of it.
And with that, we've come to the end of Part 1 in the Priory School here on BeFM Drama. Tune in tomorrow for Part 2 of the program as the investigation of the young Lord Saltire's disappearance from the Priory School leads Holmes and Watson to the scene of the crime in the far north of England.